First of all, I just want to say thanks to the Perpich School for allowing us to use this venue on very short notice. So they have always been a very good partner with us. Speaking of short notice, I just kind of wanted to explain why this came about so quickly. Is when sex offenders are released or are going to be moving, a city has no say in that whatsoever. So if any of you are wondering why this is happening here, the city of Golden Valley can do nothing about that, nor can any city. That's just the way the process works. So we got notice of this last Wednesday, and the individual who you'll get information about actually is moving into that residence this Wednesday. And so we thought a little bit of short notice was better than having this meeting after the fact. So that's why it was just a few days' notice. So with that, in just a minute, we'll get you some information, but the goal tonight is to get out as much information as we have on this particular person, and so that you all have the most information that we can possibly give you. And in a second, I will turn it over to Mark Bliven, who will put on a presentation about how this process works and then the specifics about this particular person, and then we will open it up for questions. And if you do have questions when that time comes, I would just ask that you kind of try to form a line behind this microphone. In the interest of time and fairness to get everyone out of here in a decent hour, we ask that you limit yourself to one question per person. So. And, I want to acknowledge that this is concerning. I certainly, wouldn't welcome the fact of having a sex offender move next to my residence. I know none of you do either. And so it's certainly concerning to say the least. But hopefully with the information that you can get, it'll help you understand the conditions of release and supervision that this person will be under. And we'll get all those questions answered tonight. And in terms of our city, we have very, very traditional, decades-long low crime rates, and we certainly aim to keep that going. And again, this is concerning, but it's certainly not a direct reflection on our city and the safety that we have here and the level of quality of living that we have here. So with that, please settle in, and when the time comes, we would love to answer all your questions. But for now, I will turn it over to Mark Bliven.
Thank you. I'll pull this out. Now, we are talking tonight. This is information that we're assisting, helping to provide. Back in 1996, the legislature came up with this idea of public notification meetings. The idea was not that things had changed, that life had gotten worse. They just made the decision back then that for certain offenders who were looked upon relatively as higher risk offenders, that it would help to engage the public with more knowledge about those offenders coming back into the community. It doesn't mean that this same type of offender didn't come back into the community before that, or that there aren't others who are in the community who are high risk. But the legislature decided at that time that they wanted to make sure when it came to those involved in sexual offenses that information could be used by the community not to come after these people, but to help you as a community be better informed, use that information to make sure that your families are safe, that your community is safe, and that you actually have the real information regarding these offenders. And I think that's one of the most useful things that we've done, is that in these public notification meetings, we're not just saying, here's a scary level 3 sex offender that's moving into your community. They're all the same. They're all highly dangerous. That's not the intent here. What we want to do is give you information about this particular offender so you know their background, but also give you general information about who we're talking about when we're talking about predatory offenders. So What I'm going to cover here, first idea is predatory offender registration, registered offenders, what we mean by them being in the community notification, what that means, risk level assignment, information on this particular offender, some resources, and I hope that you picked up a list of those resources up at the front table. Those are information sources you can go to later. And then give you an opportunity for questions. And that's an important thing, is this is an opportunity for you to ask questions. We'll stick around, even if we have lots of questions and we call an end to the formal meeting. If you want to stick around and ask questions later, we're going to be around here too. So feel free. You can either ask questions at the end of the presentation in front of everybody, or possibly you have a question you don't want to publicly talk about and you want to just talk to one of us individually. Feel free to do that also afterwards. So, some of the terms we're talking about: criminal sexual conduct. That's the main emphasis of what we're talking about. And we're not just talking about a specific crime. We sort of all know what we're talking about when we're saying sex offenders, but we actually don't also. The crimes we basically talk about are crimes against a person. They're crimes where it's not consenting adults involved. It's one of the reasons that things like prostitution aren't included in this definition of criminal sexual conduct. Even though those are crimes, they're not at the same degree as what we're calling tonight criminal sexual conduct. Sex offender, that's a broad definition. Not only is it people convicted of sex offenses, but it also includes people who are involved in sexual offense behavior. Minnesota is actually kind of unique in our description of what a sex offender is, or those subject to registration. You don't actually have to be convicted of a sex offense to be subject to registration in Minnesota. In most other states, if you plea bargain out of it and say you plea bargain to assault, you don't have to register as a predatory offender. In Minnesota, whether you were charged or convicted of the offense, you still have to register as long as you were convicted of something arising out of that same set of circumstances. So a plea bargain doesn't get you out of registration in Minnesota. Little bit of a unique twist we have in this state. And then a predatory offender, the reason we use the term predatory offender is because it's not just sex offenses. The legislature actually added 2 other offenses, kidnapping and false imprisonment, to the definition. So they changed it from sex offender registration to predatory offender registration. But for the most part, we're almost always going to be talking about sex offenders. Those involved with kidnapping don't tend to rise to the level of a level 3 offender subject to a meeting like this. And then recidivism, I mean, one of the big reasons we're talking about people coming back into the community is that we are all concerned about recidivism. Are these people going to re-offend? I think there's a misrepresentation, an idea a lot of people have that sex offenders, when they get out of prison, they're going to just go back to sexually reoffending. And our history is that actually their recidivism rate or their reoffense rate is fairly low. So these are terms you want to keep in mind as we're talking about these offenders tonight. So how common are sex offenses? They are fairly common. We see 1 in every 5 girls and 1 in every 7 boys are sexually abused by the time they reach adulthood. And when we're saying sexually abused, That is a broad representation. It doesn't mean that they've been abducted and sexually abused. Often that sexual offense behavior is happening and has not been officially reported, hasn't been turned into the police. Many of those abusive circumstances are happening in situations with acquaintances, often family members, places and situations where it's not going to be reported that often. And then 1 in 6 adult women and 1 in 33 adult men experience an attempted or completed sexual assault. So that's something to keep in mind. It is a common problem, but we're going to go into a little more explanation of what that is. Okay. So predatory offenders, they've always lived in Minnesota. It's only been since 1997, when the notification started, that we've known about them. We have a predatory offender risk management system, and we think it's done a very good job over the years, that we have reduced recidivism, we've helped to control reoffending behavior. We think it's changed a lot of the outcomes. So it is something we're working on all the time. It's improved over the years. We're always open to more improvements in the system. What our number one focus is always public safety. We want to make sure that the public is safe, and our management practices are focused on that. So the first sort of linchpin of this system is registration. We want to know who are the registered offenders, who are the people with a history of sexual offending. And that's, in 1991, we started this system of registration, that anybody convicted of a crime, a sex crime, or kidnapping, false imprisonment, or a crime arising out of the same circumstances as a charge, that they have to register with local law enforcement. For some, it's a 10-year period. For others, it could be for lifetime. The period changes, may get added to, but for the most part, it's a minimum of 10 years and a maximum of lifetime registration. And what that means is that local law enforcement knows about everybody with this kind of history. They have to register with law enforcement. They have to provide where they live, where they work, any motor vehicles they own or operate. If they have a secondary home somewhere, they have to register that. If they volunteer anywhere, they have to register that. If they work anywhere. All that information is available to local law enforcement for every registered offender in Minnesota. And there are about 17,500 of those registered offenders in this state. That information is a great tool for law enforcement. It's very useful for them so that they know about who is in their community. And Golden Valley knows about those living in their community. Minneapolis knows about theirs. St. Louis Park knows about theirs. New Hope knows about theirs. So every community has that information with their law enforcement agencies. And it's an internal tool. It's not for public knowledge, though. So approximately 17,500. In Hennepin County as a whole, 17,500 in the whole state, 2,500 in Hennepin County, and 30 in Golden Valley. So 30 of the 17,500 registered offenders are in Golden Valley. Every community has registered offenders. Golden Valley isn't unique. You're not going to have 0 in your community. No community, unless they're pretty tiny, is probably not going to have a registered offender. It's generally based on population. So Minneapolis has 1,500 registered offenders. Basically, smaller communities have fewer, larger communities have more. And this, we have community notification. And what we're talking about with community notification is that we take the 17,500 registered offenders and we'll look at them when they come to prison, if they come to prison. Not everybody who's subject to registration comes to prison. If you were convicted of one of these predatory offenses, you have, you could end up getting local jail time, you could get a local probation, and never see the prison. If you do go to prison, if it's serious enough for you to go to prison, what will happen is you'll come into the prison system, and prior to your release, we'll have a committee look at you, look at your whole file, your whole background, and make a determination about your risk level. We have 3 risk levels, 1, 2, or 3. We'll look at that, and if you're a lower risk offender, after reviewing your whole file, you'll get a risk level 1. If you're a moderate risk, you'll get a level 2, and if you're a higher risk person, makes up about 15% of those getting out of prison that are looked upon relatively as higher risk. Doesn't mean a high risk to reoffend, but it means higher relative to level 2s or level 1. And you'll get that risk level 3. So that notification process, that risk level assignment, only applies to those who have been to prison. And whether you've been in prison in another state or in a federal prison still applies. You're subject to that risk level assignment. Those it doesn't apply to, again, are those who just have probation or just have local jail time. It also includes juveniles. They're subject to registration, but since they're juveniles, they don't go to prison, so they don't have risk levels assigned either. So we have these offenders. It's about 90 days before they get out of prison. We analyze them, we look at them, we assign a risk level, and that's really our main responsibility. It's done. At that point, we'll take that information, produce a report, background material, information on that offender, and we'll forward it on to local law enforcement. And it's local law enforcement who then has responsibility for dealing with this information. If it's a level 1, they're going to use it just internally. If it's a level 2, they can use some of that information and share it with some organizations within the city. And if it's a level 3, then they take that information and they'll do broad public notification. And this meeting tonight is part of that broad public notification. They can have news releases on this. The information can go out to anybody and anyone in the community. And the whole idea, again, is we want the community to know about these people who have been determined to be higher risk, again, relatively. So, as I said, there's a committee that gets together, reviews that information, assigns the risk level. The factors that they're using, it's not just simply what they've been convicted of. It's predatory offense sentences, other felony sentences, if they've got harassment, stalking, violations for orders of protection, recent disorderly conduct, their age at release, if they're going to be supervised or if they're going to be unsupervised in the community, if they've completed treatment, that's both chemical dependency treatment and sex offender treatment. If they have sentences with male victims, that's actually a risk factor that we've determined. And if they commit their offenses in public places, that's another higher risk factor. So all these things are taken into account. So it's not just if they committed a sex offense or a number of sex offenses. There are a lot of factors that go into the risk level assignment. And you'll see that with the particular individual we're talking about tonight, that it's less emphasis on the number of sex offenses or the type of sex offenses and more on other behavior. So again, risk level 1, only internally basically. Level 2, some targeted notification that's done to organizations in the community. And then level 3 is this broad public notification. So how many risk levels do we have? There are about 9,000 people of the 17,500 in the state with subject to registration. About 9,000 of them have risk levels, so a little over half of them. About 5,000 of them are risk level 1. Level 2 makes up 28%, and risk level 3 makes up 15%. And that's sort of stayed the same over the years. I'm kind of surprised at that because each individual is looked upon as an individual. We don't say that we're going to make 15% level 3s, but it has over the years tended to stay in that general area. Although we have revised our assessment tools over the years as we've gotten more information and progressed with some of the information we've collected on these. But it still remains about 15% of those get assigned as the higher risk 3. And then of those level 3s, 343 of them are out in the community. That means they're subject to broad public notification. They're not restricted entirely in the community. Some of them are under supervision, some of them are not under supervision. But the idea, I sort of describe it as you could run into somebody who's a level 3 in your everyday experiences, whether you're at the grocery store, whether you're anywhere in the community, you may run into somebody who is a level 3. So one of the sort of myths that I'd like to address before we get into more detail here is the idea that the people who commit sex offenses in Minnesota are all these level 3s that we've already caught and identified, or that they're people who have already been convicted. The 17,500 people who are on the sex offender registry, if we kept complete control over them, you'd think that we'd never have any more sex offenses, right? Well, the unfortunate reality is that 90% of the sex offenses that are committed in Minnesota are committed by people who aren't on the registry. They're new people. Only 10%, this was a study done of those convicted of criminal sexual conduct in 2011, 569 sex offenders. 10% of them, or 56 of them, were on the registry. The others were not on the registry. Law enforcement didn't know about them as sex offenders. So it's an important thing to keep in mind that it's not just the registrants that we have to be aware of. It's actually people who aren't on the registry who are our biggest danger. And then just a little bit of background on who the victim profile is for those who are subject to as victims of these offenders. About a third are adults, about a third are those 12 years and younger, and then another third are those who are from the ages 13 to 17. That's actually a small age group, makes up 33% of the victims, but in our general population, it's less than 10% of those in our population are between those ages of 13 to 17. So that is a vulnerable time, and that's a time when kids are moving from childhood into being more independent, and it is a time that we should be concerned about them. They're exerting that independence, interacting with a broader variety of people. And then, who is doing the victimization? When we looked at all the people who were released from prison and their relationship to their victim, we saw that 60% of them were acquaintances, 26% were family members, and then 14% there was an unknown relationship. Some of them were stranger type relationships, but others were unclear. They may have been acquaintances, they may have been recent acquaintances too. But this is also sort of dispels one of those myths about who we're talking about. It's not the stranger that goes around grabbing children. That is actually a very rare and unique occurrence. Most sexual offending is between people who know and have a relationship, the victim and the perpetrator relationship. Often it might involve somebody who should be in a very trusted relationship, but they fail in that trusted relationship. They take advantage of it, they abuse that relationship, and they offend against their victim. And it's not always adults on children, sometimes it is children on other children. Now, another thing that should be clarified is the recidivism rate. Earlier I said, what is recidivism? It's their reoffense, their likelihood to reoffend. Back in 1990, we did a study. We looked at offenders getting out of prison. We looked at them for 3 years. And we saw that there was a 16.7% reconviction rate for those getting out of prison in 1990. Since that time, we've changed our correctional practices, our supervision practices, our law enforcement practices. In 1991, we got registration, where we're keeping track of these offenders. 1997, we got community notification. During this whole time, we've devoted more attention and resources to sex offender treatment, and we've created a more focused supervision system for sex offenders also. We've done this risk assessment. We've looked at higher risk offenders, and we focus more on them. And I think what has happened over the years, not just one factor alone has done it, but probably a whole accumulation of all the things we're doing, that those released in 1990 had almost a 17% reconviction rate. Those released in 2002 were about 2.5%. And since then, we've pretty much stabilized in that area. Maybe not 2.5%, but in that 5% area is what the recidivism rate for sex offenders is. It doesn't happen just magically. We think that the policies, the focus that we put on sex offenders has reduced that recidivism rate to that low point. So it's not 100% recidivism, it's not even high recidivism rates. It's low because we think some of the strategies we use to address this. A follow-up study looked at it for a 4-year period, found a 3.3% recidivism rate. Again, just kind of maintaining that. Another thing, and I hear people talk about it, it's very popular. I don't doubt that there aren't too many proponents who say that, well, if you just keep sex offenders out of my community, we're going to be safe. That sort of goes in the face of what we really know, that it's not about geographic proximity. Most sex offenses occur because of a relationship. It's not about geography. It's not about the distance geographically. So saying that somebody can't live within 2,000 feet of me isn't going to help you, because if that person in your life is coming in and is an acquaintance, is a professional, is somebody that's involved in the victim's life, the offense is going to happen. It has very little to do with where they actually live. It has to do with where they're associating. So we did a study. We looked at every offender who was released from prison. 224 of them committed new sex offenses. We looked at every single one of those offenses and found that not a single one was associated with their residence near a school or a daycare or a park or something like that. That it was about relationship. Again, those offenses, every single one of those 224 who committed a new offense had nothing to do with their distance to a school or park. But I bet you, even if I said, you know, you have the chance now to put in a 2,000-foot buffer around every school and park where nobody can live, most of us would probably vote for it. I wouldn't, because I know it doesn't work. But it is sort of a common feeling that we have, that we don't want these sex offenders to live in our communities. But they are going to live somewhere, and what we'd rather not have them do is drive them underground. Say, you can't live anywhere. We just hope you're out of sight, out of mind, and at the same time, you're going to be out of sight and out of mind of the law enforcement, and that's probably the worst situation we can be in. We don't want them to be homeless, because it's much more difficult to keep track of these registered offenders when they're homeless. We also don't want to not know that they're associating with people in our community. Better to have people you're concerned about close by where you can keep an eye on them than to have them sort of be in the shadows all the time and sneaking into your life. So the real ideas that we should be keeping in mind is that 90% of all the sex offenders who are convicted don't end up being convicted of a new sex offense. One of the most important things that happen to a sex offender when they get convicted is that their veil of secrecy is removed. If they were offending against family members, against acquaintances, they no longer can do that. That veil of secrecy that they were operating in no longer applies. As soon as it becomes public and it's known, we know that happens. That's the best way of stopping somebody. The alternative to that, though, is if people get away with it, they will continue. If they don't get caught, those are the sex offenders who have a high recidivism rate. If they get away with it once, they'll try it a second, third, and they will continue, and we'll see that happening. People have a history for years, many, many years of offending because they never get caught, they never get turned in. Those are the sex offenders that we need more information on, the ones that aren't on the registry, the ones that law enforcement doesn't know about, that you as a community, broad community, doesn't know about. Also, 90% of sex offenses are committed by people who aren't on the registry. This whole idea that, oh, I can trust this person because they're not a convicted sex offender. No, if they're engaged in questionable behavior, absolutely, you shouldn't be trusting them. And I cringe when I hear people say that, and I hear that actually quite often. People will say, well, I thought he was okay because he wasn't on the sex offender registry. No, 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 don't ever think that. If they're doing something questionable, if it's questionable behavior, if it's an adult going off alone with a child, I'm going to be concerned about that. I don't care how clean their criminal record is. If it's questionable behavior, question it. And then 90% of sex offenses are committed by someone who is known to the person they victimize. That's also this sort of disconcerting thing we have to address when we're talking about sex offending in our community, is that it is the people we know who are committing most of the sex offenses. Yeah, it would be great if we could just say, no, it's the boogeyman, it's the stranger, it's the person in the van that drives in from out of town, and they're the only ones we have to worry about. No, we actually have to worry about the people in our lives. Hold people accountable. If you got a bad feeling about a relationship, something that's going on, follow through with that. It's important that people are held accountable for their behaviors. So it's about relationship. It is not about residence or geographic proximity. So tips for parents: know the people your children are hanging out with. Again, I talk about that 13 to 17 year age when kids are being more independent. Who are they getting involved with? You usually know who they're involved with when they're younger, but as they get older, you really want to know about that. My son, I thought my only job in life was to annoy him with the questions. I tried to give him the impression that I knew about 90% of what he was doing in life. I probably knew about 10% of what he was doing. But he never knew which 10%. So that is our jobs as adults, as parents, is, yes, it is to annoy our kids, to ask them questions. Keep them in line, making sure that they know somebody is concerned about them and is going to follow through with questions. Next. So also just some of these behavior signs. When you notice your kids, something's different, sometimes it's nothing to be too concerned about, but when you notice a lot of these different behaviors that are changing dramatically, I know, again, using my son as an example, he went from 12 to 13 and it was horrible transition. But you still have to stick with it, pay attention to what's going on, be concerned about what those changes are, especially when they start talking about friends that they have, especially friends who are giving them gifts. Be very concerned about that. And then the same thing with adults. And I knew that growing up. There were certain adults that we knew about, that we were a little bit concerned about. We as adults have to be concerned about that too. You cannot trust everybody completely. Don't blindly allow your kids to be manipulated by someone. It's very difficult. And no matter how well you do it, it still will happen. Doesn't matter how much you put into it, it can still happen. There are very manipulative people who are able to get away with things, but paying attention is going to help. Usually, it often takes some of these very manipulative adults years to be caught. Just hopefully, it's fewer years all the time, or it gets stopped very early on. So, we're going to talk about the specific person who is moving into Golden Valley. This is a more recent photograph of him, Roderick James Emery. And I'll go through details of his background and sort of explains the difference between him and some others. He's still a risk level 3. He's been placed in this category of somebody we want to keep an eye on. So he's 35 years old, 5'9", 156 pounds, so sort of a medium size. Brown eyes, black hair, 6200 block of Golden Valley Road, across Golden Valley Road from here. His history, he has an adult conviction for a crime that had an element of criminal sexual conduct. This is a very interesting case in that he was not involved in the criminal sexual conduct, but because an accomplice of his was, he is found responsible for that also. He does have a juvenile history of criminal sexual conduct. Now, if that had been his only criminal sexual conduct, we wouldn't be talking about him today, because juvenile history is private information. But by becoming a level 3, that history has been opened up on that. So some of this private information now can be disclosed by local law enforcement, just to give you a better idea of why he became a level 3. And then numerous supervision violations. He has been in and out of prison, not really for a lot of new criminal behavior, but that he's just not been cooperative. And as we go through this, I'll sort of point out that that is really why he's at this risk level 3, is not because of his sexual offense history as much as just because he's been a very difficult case to supervise. He's not been cooperative. He's not played by the rules. So his adult crime back in 2000 was an accomplice of his. The two of them went to the apartment. His accomplice assaulted a woman he knew. They went there to rob her, take some things from her. He was angry at her. The accomplice sexually assaulted the victim, and Roderick was not involved in that sexual assault, but because he was involved in the burglary, he was held accountable for that. He was charged with criminal sexual conduct as an accessory because he was there as part of the crime. He was actually only convicted of the burglary. But again, because he was charged with criminal sexual conduct, he was convicted of something arising out of the same set of circumstances. He has to register as a predatory offender for that. So he received a 111-month sentence, a little more than 9-year sentence for that burglary. So it was a serious crime. and that was up in St. Louis County. Now, the additional sexual history he has is that at the age of 12, he engaged in sexual contact with a minor female victim. He was known to the victim. That was in the juvenile system. He got probation. He was supervised for that as a 12-year-old. Again, if that had been the extent of it, we would not know about this, not know about the history. But that contributes to his risk assessment and is involved in that. But even with those two offenses, we wouldn't be talking about him as a level 3 tonight either. What happened with him is really his going in and out of prison, not being cooperative. He got a theft conviction, actually a new theft conviction in between. He got that FTR means failure to register. He was not in compliance with his registration, and that's enough to send you back to prison. But most of his returns to prison were not for new crimes. It was that he just simply would not cooperate with supervision. He was told he couldn't have an internet device, he couldn't have a cell phone, he did it. He couldn't have alcohol, he had alcohol. So because of his uncooperative nature, kept coming back and back and back. That's what built him up. He actually started out as a level 1, moved up to a level 2, then up to a level 3. We said age is one of those things that helps reduce risk as he ages out of it. He's at 35 now. We're hoping to see him settle down, be more cooperative now. But during his 20s, he was not a good supervisee. Okay. So we do have him for another more than 6 years. We have 6 more years. He'll be in his 40s by the time he's done with supervision. At the end of that time, if he has not committed any new crimes, he'll be done with supervision. But his registration period where he has to report to law enforcement will continue for, again, a minimum of 10 years from the last time he's been in jail. So at this point, it would be 2025. Okay. But for the next 6 years, he is going to be under supervision, and he's going to have a lot of strict rules that he has to comply with. If he doesn't, he can be restructured, added new restrictions, or he could be bounced back to prison again. He can be bounced back for any period of time. Usually it'll be a short time. Could be 6 months going back to prison, get him resettled and say, okay, are you ready to now go back out? What we really want for these offenders who are coming out of prison is we want a transition period. In the next 6 years, the best thing for all of us would be if he can comply with his supervision requirements, and then slowly over the next 6 years, they'll get decreased little by little, meaning he'll get a little bit more independence, fewer restrictions, until we reach July of 2021, and when he's completely done with his entire sentence, he won't really notice that much of a difference between being on supervision and not being under supervision. His problem is if he keeps doing what he has done in the past, he'll keep going back to prison, coming out with a high level of restrictions, and we'll never be able to test that. Again, we hope, but we are going to hold him accountable. Hennepin County Community Corrections is going to be watching after him. His agent, Bob Dustin, his phone number's up there. He is going to be watching after him, but actually the whole Hennepin County intensive supervised release team is available to work on this situation. And when they're supervising him, they basically have the right to check in on him 24 hours a day. They can show up at 3 o'clock in the morning to make sure he's where he's supposed to be, because he's required to be on a strict schedule. He's not allowed to be out after 10 o'clock at night. He has to maintain a calendar of what he's doing, looking for a job, working, going to school, that he has to use his time productively. He's not able to just do whatever he wants during the day. He's got to use productive use of his time. He's not going to be wandering around the neighborhood. If you ever were to see him wandering around the neighborhood, absolutely call Golden Valley Police or call his agent. Let them know, because he is on a strict schedule. Now, can he go to work? Can he go to school? Can he go to places, treatment programs, things like that? Yes. But if he looks like he's in a place he shouldn't be, questionable area, if he's hanging out with questionable people, absolutely, we want to know about that. So, this intensive supervised release program, again, it's 24 hours a day that he can be monitored. No, there's not going to be somebody outside his door watching him all the time, but he'll have fairly frequent contacts during the week. And he's also needs to be in daily contact by phone. Some of the elements, he'll start out at house arrest, meaning he's only allowed to be in his house and then for limited time out. Again, he's not going to just be going for walks in the neighborhood. Electronic monitoring, that's something that will start out, just to be doubly sure on that. It's a tool used to monitor him for 30 to 60 days. He'll have random drug and alcohol testing, making sure he's not using any chemicals. Alcohol's included. He's not allowed any use of alcohol. Unannounced residential work contacts, that means the agents can stop in any time of day or night to check on him, make sure he's in compliance. He'll have those strict schedules. If he needs to go grocery shopping, he's going to let his agent know when that period is. He can't just decide when he's going out. He can't go to Super America at 1 o'clock in the morning because he needs something. He's not allowed to do that. Daily check-ins and treatment. He needs to comply with any treatment requirements, and sex offender treatment is part of that. Any chemical dependency treatment that may be necessary, he has to comply with that also. He can't have sexually explicit materials. He cannot have any contact with minors. He's not allowed to be in contact with minors. He can't communicate with them. He can't call on the phone. He can't have a Facebook site to contact minors. He can't even pass a note. He can't give a note to a friend of his to pass that note on to a minor. He's not allowed that kind of interaction. No alcohol. He can't be even in his own house and drink a beer. It's not allowed. And no use of internet. Eventually, we would hope that he's going to be able to use the internet for good purposes, job search, information search, things like that. but it's strictly controlled because he's not allowed to use it for sexual purposes. Again, in his circumstances, unlike some of the other level 3s, he doesn't have much of a history of sexual offending. Again, his only real sexual offense was as a 12-year-old, and then being present when a sexual assault was happening earlier as an adult. So because he got the failure to register, his registration period's actually 15 years. So when he got out of prison in March, he then had 15 years of registration required, so until 2030. So he'll be 50 years old if he does not go back to jail or prison again. He'll have to register until he's 50. At that point, he will be done with registration. So if you do see anything of question regarding him, and you're not likely to see him in your neighborhood really, if you're near his house and he's coming or going, you may see that, but he's not going to be walking around your neighborhood, socializing with people in the neighborhood, absolutely not going near parks and schools, things like that. But if you do have any concerns, any questions, go ahead and call 911. We have the general number for the Golden Valley Police Department, but I don't think 911 is overwhelmed. If you have concerns and you think there might be some criminal activity going on or something that could harm somebody, questionable, that you need the assistance of a police officer, if you need a police officer, call 911. That's important. Use that. It doesn't get overused. If you're somebody who calls it all the time to find out what the weather's like, hold off. But for the most part, I think we have more concerns that people don't use it often enough and soon enough. So go ahead if there's an issue of possible public safety, any issue where you need the assistance of law enforcement, go ahead and call. Now, if there are any issues of sexual assault, general questions about these issues, and sometimes these community notifications sort of bring up issues that are unrelated to this particular person, but you want to know some resources for that. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office has a victim witness program. There's also the Sexual Violence Center of Hennepin County. But those are some resources that are also available. They're not on that fact sheet you have there. I will have them leave that up there later. These you have on the fact sheet that you were able to pick out at the entrance. So, and also these. So, we're at the point where if you have any questions, please raise your hand, ask the question. If you could come up to the microphone right down here and ask that question. Again, if you don't want to ask it out in public here, come up afterwards.
Thank you, Mark. And I want to echo just something what Mark was talking about, calling 911. For sure, if you want us to check something out, just dial 911. We get a lot of people who say, oh, I don't want to bother you. That's what we're here for. Honestly, if you call the desk number that was up there and we need an officer to come out, they're simply going to hang up and they're going to dial 911 for you. So you're just cutting out the middle person there, and you're saving a few seconds, which in some cases, in a lot of different types of crimes, helps us apprehend somebody. So if it's the least bit suspicious, you guys live where you live, you're the best people to know if something's not quite right. It's 911 if you need an officer to respond. And before we get to some questions, I think a number of you might have been surprised when you saw that number up earlier, that we have 30 offenders living in our city, thinking, well, how the heck did I not know about that? And as you listen to Mark's presentation, the vast majority of those folks are lower level offenders. And so what we do many times a year is our staff goes out and checks on every registered offender, whether they're, whatever their level is, to make sure that they are in compliance. And I would say generally most of them are in compliance, but when we find that they're not, most of the reason they're not is they failed to register. So either, typically what happens is they registered at some point for a place in Golden Valley, but when we go to check on them next month, they're no longer living there and they've left, but they failed to register. Maybe they moved to Coon Rapids or something, and they failed to register, and that is that FTR, failed to register. Or conversely, sometimes when we respond to calls at residences, we end up finding out through identifying people that there's actually somebody who is a registered sex offender, and they're living in a residence in our city, but they never registered here. So it works that way as well for failure to register if they're coming into our city or they're supposed to be here, but they've left. And so those are the folks that we check on multiple times a year. And again, the vast majority of those are the lower levels. So with that, again, we're here to be partners with you, and I think you see from Mark's presentation that this whole process is a pretty delicate balance of folks who have committed crimes, gone to prison, and a delicate balance of trying to reintegrate them into our communities and society, and how to do that with some risk management. And so we too, as police, we're not going to stand guard outside their house because we can't harass people. Again, these are folks in a delicate balance trying to reintegrate back into the community. That's not to say we will not check out if folks have suspicions. That's absolutely what we're here for. For those folks who are under direct supervision, much like this guy, their supervisors are really diligent in keeping them to their restrictions. And so I can't remember the last time we really have gotten a call from the supervisor saying, hey, this guy or gal is really out of whack, could you come and help us? Because they do a phenomenal job of supervising them. There are a lot of conditions, a lot. But that doesn't mean we don't still have fears, and so we need to work together with that. So, questions? Please step up to the microphone.
Who decided that he lived at 6200 Golden Valley Road?
Well, again, the city has no discretion in that, and in the terms of his release, if I understand correctly, he can choose that at the point he's in his programming, if you will, his release. He's free to choose an address, but he has to register at that address, which is what this meeting is about. Yeah.
Will he be living in a home with another person, in an apartment? Will he be by himself, or will there be other adults in wherever he's living?
I don't know about the other. He's living in an individual unit. I do not know the identities of the people that live in other units.
Yeah, the question was, what is his living situation? Is he living with other people? One thing about the public notification is we're really not allowed to do public notification on people who aren't level 3 offenders. So we can't really give too much information about who he might or might not be living with, but the reality is he's living on his own. He will be monitored by his agent, but he's on his own. He's not living with other family members or people. But that may change. That could change. The question was, who decided where he was going to live? He decides, as was said there. Somebody getting out of prison, they're responsible for finding a place to live. And for somebody who's a level 3 offender sometimes it's very difficult. They don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of options, a lot of choices, and when they find a place where they can live, they're responsible for maintaining that.
Yes, ma'am.
If he were to violate his probation and say, go back to prison, and then come out a couple months later and live in the same area, do you guys notify us again, or how does that work if that is the case?
Well, every time he comes back into the community, moves into any community, even if he didn't violate, if he just found a new place to live in another community, we do public notification at that time, or local law enforcement. Now, you're not going to be notified if he leaves, especially if he leaves for just a short time and then returns. You can actually look on our Level 3 website, and it will show you if he's out in the community. We have that Level 3 website. It'll show, if you follow him by name, you'll be able to find out if he's living in another community. But what we don't want to do is say, hey, all's clear. Boom, he's gone from your community, because he may be returning and he may have connections to your community, and even if he doesn't live here, he may come back to visit too. So you will always know if he's living there, because he'll be on our Level 3 website. But how you handle it in Golden Valley, if he leaves for a month, might be different from if he left for 3 years. And there's never a guarantee that he would be coming back to that same address either.
I would like to know, how does electronic monitoring work? Is that the thing around their ankle, or who watches over that?
Yeah, there's an electronic monitoring that's done in the initial release time period. And really think of it as a tool. It is not something that prevents anybody from doing anything. What it does is it monitors that person so that if they leave their designated area, we get notification of that, and their agent and police can follow up on that. But it's not something that applies an electric shock or anything like that. It's just basically a monitor to say, if he's left where he's supposed to go, if he were to get up and, go to Super America at 2 in the morning, even if the agent wasn't around, we'd get notice that.
How does that work?
It's GPS monitor, so a lot of people have their phone. If you have a phone now, actually that works sort of the same way. You can be tracked wherever you are. What that ankle bracelet does is it doesn't allow you to take that off or turn off the monitor. But actually it works the same way your cell phone does. As long as your cell phone is on, a lot of people can find out where you are if you have GPS tracking on.
Does Golden Valley have other level 3 sex offenders?
There aren't any. There are no other level 3 offenders who are subject to community notification. There are some in halfway houses, both in Golden Valley and Minneapolis and St. Paul, that may be level 3s, but because of their monitoring status, they're not subject to broad public notification, because they're never allowed to just wander around. If they do, they're also brought back and revoked. But they're an exception to that. There are none that are the broad public. And when you have 30, it's less likely that you're going to have the public notification ones.
Sir?
Yeah, the question is, be more specific than the 6200 block. 6200 block. The reason we're more general on that is not because you as local residents wouldn't be able to figure that out, but an important part of this is it's for public safety purposes. You don't want to broadcast to the broad non-neighborhood people, to the whole world, that here's a targeted house. Go ahead, go there from outside your community and vandalize it, something like that. That doesn't really enhance public safety, but you as community members, if you're in that area, I don't think it would take much for you to ask one of your neighbors, so what house are they talking about? And that's fine. You're gonna know about what that property is, but broad public notification shouldn't be done, because that's not gonna help anybody. And if there are properties that you don't know who lives there, they're always going to be questionable. Everybody should know your neighbors. You know, we would hope that. That's going to be the safest community. And I know this community, you do know what's going on in your community, and I bet you it wouldn't be very tough for you to figure out which specific address that was. But we don't like to announce it. He is, yeah, the question was, what does he do for money? Everybody who gets out of prison is responsible for financing their way. We transition, we assist in transition when they're in halfway houses, because we want to make sure we get them out the door and that they're smoothly doing that transition, but they are responsible for earning their rent money, their grocery money. I mean, there are some people who get out of prison and might have disabilities, something like that, but he is responsible for getting a job, getting support. Yeah, that's one of the requirements. He has to make good use of his time, and that's this opportunity now that he's going to be in the community. One of his big tasks is to make sure he's well employed. He has to make progress towards that, but as long as he can pay his rent and he can survive, if he's getting assistance from family members, getting assistance from other people who might be supporting him, we can't question that, but he does have to make productive use of his time. And what we see is that most people who are able to comply with supervision eventually get some kind of employment. It's very limited for a lot of them. It's tough to find a job, but those jobs are available.
Are you putting, or is this person moving into an area where drugs and alcohol will be accessible for him easily?
No. His requirement is that he cannot have access to drugs and alcohol. If he's found associating with people involved in that, when a random drug test is done on him, if any sign of that, he can be pulled. That's a revocation type offense. So that's one of the strict requirements on him. And he should not be hanging around with anybody who's known for that type of activity. That could get him into trouble too. So, and we want to hear about that. If anybody here sees him hanging around with people involved with alcohol, involved with drugs, absolutely report it. You know, it may not be illegal activity, but it's violating his conditions of release. So he may not be charged with a crime if he has a beer, but he could be yanked back into jail at least.
Is he gonna be on medical assistance or some kind of aid from the county to help him pay for his rent? Because I don't understand how he can come up with this money when he's been in prison. How does he come up with the money?
No, the question was, is he on medical aid? That's very unusual for people coming out of prison. There are some that do get medical assistance coming out of prison, but for the most part, they're going to have to come up with it from employment or assistance from private family members, friends, whatever, to get into that transition. We've seen many offenders who go through this process and they get jobs and they pay their rent.
Yeah, just a quick question, that recidivism rate went down significantly. I was just wondering if that differs based on the level of offense. Like, is that true also for third-level offenders as it is for 1 and 2?
Yeah, the question is, when I showed that recidivism rate going down, one of the reasons that we've identified high-risk offenders is so that they don't actually offend at a high level. So those rates are equivalent, that level 1s, level 2s, and level 3s do actually offend at about the same low rate. And those under supervision, the high-risk offenders under supervision, level 3s, actually have the lowest recidivism rate because they are so focused on. So they are actually the lowest recidivism rate.
What's the radius of, like, around the residence where you have that people are notified, like, if there's a meeting?
There really isn't a strict radius. We took everywhere reasonably close that was residential. And we erred going way big as opposed to way small. Sir?
When you say recidivism rate, people talking scrutiny, just reoffend, or if they violate their parole or the conditions of their release, do you consider that as recidivism too, or just a new offense or a reoffender?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we're talking about recidivism rate, what I'm talking about is reoffending sexually. I'm not even talking about criminal activity of other kinds, which may be higher. And then I also do not include things like use of alcohol, which is a violation but not a crime. Speaking to a 14-year-old is a violation of their release, but it's not a crime. So that's not included either. But when we're talking about sexual recidivism rate, it's only for sexually reoffending. Yep. Yeah.
So if you committed a burglary or theft, that would be equivalent to recidivism.
Yeah, so further clarification on that. When we talk about recidivism, I didn't include any information on other crimes they may have committed. It's not really the focus of this community notification is criminal activity outside of that, although that contributes to their risk level, sort of the antisocial thing, but no, we're not including those offenses. But what we find is that sexual reoffending is actually a fairly low recidivism, but things like car theft, one of the highest recidivism rates. People who get convicted of car theft, more than 50% of them recommit that crime after getting caught. So.
Other than the picture that we have here, are there any other identifying traits like tattoos or anything like that?
You know, I don't have anything like that listed. We can provide them to law enforcement if you wanted to get information like that. It's just not normally posted like that. there is, one thing we do with the photographs is that we will update them as needed. But if there are any things like that, like significant tattoos, you can ask law enforcement and if we need to provide extra information for them on that.
Any other questions?
Has it been determined that he doesn't have any mental health issues that could be contributing to his behavior? And if so, would that have been addressed?
The question about mental health needs, and that is, mental health needs are normally addressed at the county level. He did have those. Any issues like that would be addressed in prison. It is part of his supervision plan, is any mental health issues. If he needs to have medical or mental health appointments, he is required to attend those. If he's prescribed any medications, he's required to do that. And that applies to all offenders who are at this level under supervision. So it is taken into account, especially on these high-risk offenders. And it's an important thing to always keep in mind. Most of the people in prison have issues. A lot of our mental health care is handled by the criminal justice system and the prison system, and I think you hear a lot of people addressing that, is that we could do away with a lot of incarcerations if we were dealing with the mental health issues separately. But that's a big concern, and I think it's being addressed as we see pressure on criminal justice systems when it's truly more mental health issues. Back.
Correct me if I'm wrong. This youngster at age 12 did something. Okay. He took part, but he didn't commit a rape or whatever it was on this girl. He went to prison for being an accomplice. Spent 9 years in prison. And during that time or after that time, his level increased, not because he committed more sexual acts. I think we're a little hysterical here. I don't know that, maybe I haven't heard the whole story, but it just seems to me, they want to know tattoos or where this guy, I mean, is this fella deserving of this kind of action? I'm not being sympathetic in any way, shape, or form, but if this fellow were, when I thought about her tonight about a level 3, I thought this is real serious, but he's been raised because he's been not reporting and doing other things that have no relation to any sexual orientation.
Yeah, I'm actually the director of the Risk Assessment Community Notification Unit, and it is my job to look at the process for how we do risk assessment. A psychologist and a committee gets together, takes this information, and all level 3s aren't the same. It is very different, and that's why we have these meetings, to explain the difference in somebody like this. He is not a very cooperative member of society. I mean, he actually doesn't have even a long criminal history, but it gets real frustrating when somebody will not cooperate at all, and those factors do lead to a higher risk level, is what we've determined when we've looked at offenders in the past. Those likely to reoffend sexually have a history like his. But you are right that if I'm looking at him, I'm seeing him also at the low level of the level 3. His sexual history is one of the most limited that I've come across for a level 3 offender. Absolutely right. The key goal we have for him is to get his life settled in, find a job, use his time productively. He needs to earn a living, so he needs to get a job of some kind, and then start stabilizing, building a life. Often what we find is in this transitional period, they'll get their feet on the ground, and then if they stabilize, then they'll be able to move on and start making other choices. Where do they really want to live? Is it in Golden Valley? Is it somewhere else? That the more he succeeds in his life now, the more choices he's going to have about where he can go from this point. But we're all going to win if he stabilizes. That's what we want. And we've seen that. Most of the guys, most of even the level 3s we see coming out, they stabilize. It's a tough road they have to do it, but even those with some much worse background history stabilize and get their life straightened out. So that's what we're hoping. But that's, and we're working to make that succeed.
Any questions? Ma'am?
Hearing that the prison system is the group that would be responsible for their mental health, well, it appears that he has, the fact that he's in and out and out, he's got an impulsiveness, anger management. Are there any programs he's going to be able to be in to deal with his, becoming a sociable
Yeah. Yeah, the question is his antisocial behavior, and he has a history of that. His antisocial behavior, how's he going to deal with that? That's part of his supervision plan too. Anger management, any kind of mental health issues are part of his plan over the next 6 years. It's an integral part of that. But he makes the choices about how well he's going to work with that. Again, we hope we assist as much as we can, but ultimately, it still ends up being his choices. The question is, if there's a burglary in the neighborhood, he's absolutely the first place anybody's going to look. I mean, he knows that. I mean, that's the good thing about a level 3 designation is that everybody's keeping him honest. He knows that if he looks sideways wrong, he's the first one people are going to look at. So.
Yeah, the question again is, can we ask where he was? One of the nice things about this is the level of supervision and the electronic monitoring. If a burglary happened at your house, and I hope it doesn't for any of our houses here, but one thing that'll be very clear is we can tell exactly where he was when the burglary was occurred because he's on GPS. And ironically, we had a crime here about 2 years ago where someone accused a guy of sexual assault. And we thought it was him. The story was believable, and the reality is he was proven to be nowhere near there because he was on ankle monitoring. So we can absolutely ask around. I mean, typically what we'll have is, absent someone like this in the vicinity, we'll have some clues and whatnot as to what happened during that burglary. If that were to lead to him, of course we will. Like Mark said, unfortunately, or fortunately, how you look at it, he's probably the number one suspect at a time. Does that mean he did it? In all likelihood, probably not, quite honestly, because again, in terms of the the recidivism related to that, it's probably not going to be him. The odds are very much against that. Doesn't mean we won't look there. Absolutely. When we're trying to solve a crime, we'll look anywhere because, you know, you have to go where it leads you, and sometimes you have to look where, you know, it might be the last place. So absolutely. But a very good tool for us will be the electronic monitoring because it's very easy to tell where he was. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a legitimate question. Is if he wants to commit a crime, there's reality is yes, he can commit a crime. If he just wants to commit a crime, get caught and go to prison, that will happen. The reality is that's not how people really operate. No, it actually isn't his history. His history is not to go to his neighbors and do. Yeah. And what I want to point out is, again, going back to my description of his history, he didn't reoffend over it. Violations are not new crimes. When he uses alcohol, that's not a new crime. He had only one new offense, and that was a theft. And that wasn't a burglary even. So he doesn't have a long history of burglary. The one burglary that he committed was a burglary of someone his friend knew very well. So it wasn't even a stranger type offense. And also a reality about people who commit offenses, if they're going to reoffend with something like a burglary, they're not going to go across the street. They really don't. That's not their history. They're going to go to a community where they're unknown. Same thing with sex offenses too. If it is a stranger type offense, they don't go across the street. They go somewhere where they're not known, where they're not on the local registry. If they're going to do that, it's not a very common thing for somebody to say, I'm going to commit a burglary, I'm going to go across the street or go down the block, commit a burglary, know that I'm going to be the first suspect, I'm going to be arrested, convicted, and sent to prison. That could possibly happen. Yes, there's never a guarantee that something like that would never, ever happen, but it's very unlikely. Yeah, question, is he allowed to have a pet of some kind? Probably. That would be up to his agent if he's able to take care of it. If it's a bother to people, if it's an obnoxious barking dog, he's probably going to be talked out of something like that and say, no, you are being disruptive in the neighborhood. You don't need to be that. So he will be strongly talked out of that, something like that. Yep. Yes. His schedule, if he has a dog to walk, and this is a few years down the road when he has to take the dog for a walk, he can't get one next month or 3 months down the road. He will have to have a designated route, and it has to be okayed by the agent, something like that. Now, if we're 5.5 years down the road and he's moving towards the end of his sentence, you don't, and he's been doing great all along, you don't want to be so restrictive that all of a sudden he's at the end of his sentence and now you're free to do anything you want. We would hope that he's now done well enough that there's not going to be that much of a difference. And yeah, he'll be allowed to go for walks at that point, but it will be very strictly monitored in the early years, at least. Just one, he's the only one subject to community notification. He is not. We're talking about, there was a big meeting here.
Yeah, you're talking about Clarence Opheim. We had a meeting here. Yeah, he moved out of Golden Valley about roughly a year after he moved here. And he, moved to a different community who they had a meeting just like we did. But no, he hasn't been here that was in 2012. We had that meeting, and I want to say by, early to mid 13, he was gone. This is, we had an offender that was subject to community notification a number of years ago. I mean, more than 10, 11-ish years. Then we had the Clarence Opheim in 12, and then this is the third one. Yeah, like I said, it was the first one was quite a long time ago, much closer to after the requirement came about, and then we didn't have another one until 2012. Well, we have 30 total registered offenders. Yeah, correct.
They're actually, most of them don't have any risk level. That means they didn't go to prison, so they're a zero risk level. Not that they shouldn't call them zero risk level. They have not been assigned a risk level.
Yeah, no. If I think what you're getting to is we have registered offenders, those people that are subject to register every year for some time period, and then there are people that are assigned a risk level. And some people that have to register also have a risk level, but the vast majority don't have a risk level, but they're required to be registered, if that makes sense. So maybe all of your conditions, at some point you committed a sexual assault, the criteria kicked in, but at some point all of your conditions went away because you met them and were rehabilitated, that you are still you still have to register, but at this point you no longer are assigned a risk level.
And that does bring up that issue about, please don't think, and it's one of the worst things about public notification. We think there are a lot of benefits, but the idea that says this is a bad neighborhood because there's a level 3 and this neighborhood's good, or this community's good because there isn't a level 3 within 3 miles, that's a bad idea to get into, because what we've seen is that sexual offenses happen everywhere, and to have a false sense of security to say, oh, there are no level threes in this community, so I'm perfectly safe. My kids can wander around. I never have to worry about anybody. Well, we've seen that that isn't true. It happens everywhere that there are sexual offenses happening. And again, most of them are occurring between people who are known to each other. And that big unfortunate part, even family members.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The monitoring goes on for 30 to 60 days. So again, don't think of it as a preventive. It's a good tool. It's just to test the person to make sure that they're able to comply with that level. So it can be extended if felt necessary, or it can be shorter if necessary, but it'd be a minimum of 30 days.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you for your patience and your attendance here tonight. Again, if you have any questions about this, you can feel free to call us at the department. There are a lot of other resources on there too, but if you have questions, certainly that relates specific to Golden Valley, we will be absolutely happy to answer them, and please do make that call. If they're more specific to either the state or the county, we might route you there, so please don't think we're passing the buck if you do call and we don't have the specific answer, but we will get it for you and give you the resource to get that answer. We want everyone to have as much information as they can, and as we go forward, if you have concerns, please let us know. Otherwise, again, I'll make the pitch, whether it's about this guy or more broadly, if you have any concerns at all, suspicions about your neighborhood, whether it's just somebody walking down the street that you don't know, or summer's out now and kids sometimes have too much free time and get into a little bit of trouble, please call 911, let us know. That's what we're here for. We much rather come out and have it be nothing than to miss an opportunity because you didn't call, and now, we might have a crime that was committed and it's unsolved. So you're never bothering us unless, as Mark said, you're calling about the weather. So. But in all seriousness, please call us, and we're here to help you, and we need you to help us as well. Thank you very much.